All right, I'll make a video. I've had so many whispers this morning about one topic that I've actually just stopped answering to them. So if you're an individual that's whispered me about this, this is the reason. Now I'm going to cover this in a video, which was my plan all along, and I'm going to have many more videos regarding this update, an absolutely massive update. I've seen really nothing but positive feedback from people who have logged on and experienced it. There was some negative feedback and people leaving the game and so forth due to some changes as they saw them in the notes and whatnot. However, from everybody that's logged in, I've had nothing but positive feedback. I myself am pretty thrilled at this point, to be honest. So what's the topic? Combat rating, affixes, magic attributes. What are we now trying to do with our gear? So let's first take a look at a piece of gear, this pair of pants, because it has 3 equal attributes, and that makes it fairly easy to do the math. So 345 plus 345 is 690, plus another 345 is 1035, which is what it has for combat rating. Well, the note said that this was going to vary and that pieces were now going to have different attributes and different combat rating, that it was no longer the sum of the attributes. Well, this is an old piece, so that's why you may be seeing pieces like this. There's probably still a chance that it could roll identical. However, this is an old piece. I want to be very clear about that. The old pieces have not changed. I imagine, one, it would just be more work for them to do that, and two, there would be people that were upset if their combat rating was just lowered when they logged in, or their attributes were changed for something that seemed worse off. So that's why that hasn't been altered. If you acquire new gear, for example, like this neck, you'll see that 423 plus 421 is equal to 844, which does not match the combat rating, which is 893. And this is the neck on the right of the two that are shown. Now, a ton of features are bugged in terms of your inventory, in terms of your stash, not showing the overlay when you mouse over them, not allowing you to remove them from the stash at times. I'm sure they're going to be aware of these issues. I have not passed them on personally yet, but I'm sure they're going to get reports of this, and I'm sure that these will be attended to. You just have to bear with it for now. Now, the piece I have equipped has 813 combat rating, which is the total of 407 and 406, because that is an old piece. Now, I actually want to unequip my old piece now that I've shown you that, so that I can kind of display it in the middle of the screen so you can see. And we're going to actually compare these two pieces as we talk about what may be preferable. So if we are doing content like a challenge rift and we're pushing towards the upper limits of what we can clear, or we're doing a raid that we've just reached the combat rating to, or trying to stay alive and contribute more to the raid, whatever it may be, if you're after combat rating because it's the limiting factor in what you're capable of clearing, you'll almost always want to go with the piece that has more combat rating, okay? This has not changed from anything in the previous version of the game, and I truly feel that that is really a previous version of the game, and what we've gotten in this update is massive. This is like a 2.0, or almost feels like an expansion of sorts, where we have just gone in another direction and the game is just kind of accelerating towards new things. So again, combat rating for challenge rifts, combat rating for raids until you're basically farming them. Now at this point, there's very little reason to do a challenge rift if it's not progressing. You may be helping somebody finish theirs or clear rifts for the first time, and that would be fine. You know, maybe you'll use a combat rating piece in that situation, but for the most part, if something's on farm, you're going to be using a different piece because you're going to find more value in it. And let's talk about why. So this piece here on the neck, we're getting vitality, which is going to increase our health, and intellect. Now, we don't really need vitality. We need a certain amount, but we don't need a ton if we're farming the content, just like we don't need excessive combat rating. So the vitality on this piece is actually not all that worthwhile once we exceed that threshold of combat rating. The intellect in this situation gives 30% of the main stat to damage. And that's important to note because 30% compared to your other main stats and what they contribute. So here you can see my total intellect, and 30% of that is going to be what I get for a damage increase. Well, if we compare that to, say, fortitude, we're going to get 10% for armor and 10% for armor penetration. So there's actually a difference, meaning that the main stat for intellect actually gives us a higher percentage back towards another stat, damage in this case, and a lower percentage goes to two different places for fortitude, and same with willpower. So when we combine this in conjunction with something like Ivan's, we get the total of all of our secondary stats in regards to things like armor, armor pen, potency, and resistance. Now, Ivan's also has really poor values when it comes to damage and life. In fact, using your gems inside of Ivan's is a poor way to kind of progress your character, because you get more value out of progressing the stats like potency, resistance, armor, or armor pen, because it's just the way that it's set up. So you want to balance all of these things to make your character successful, and we won't go on for 40 minutes here. I just want to kind of make you aware of those relationships, that the value in return for damage from your main stat is better than the value that you would get from Ivan's, and you need to acquire damage from somewhere, right? You get it from your gear, you get it from your red gems, but you need to kind of acquire enough damage to actually kill targets. So intellect or strength, if you're playing a strength-based class, is still going to be your best stat. It's still going to be the main stat, and main is just a correct way to accurately describe these. So let's compare this piece in terms of attributes and combat rating first, and then we'll go even more. So combat rating, the Shepherd's has less combat rating. So if I'm pushing new content, challenge rifts, or raids, I don't want to use that. If I'm farming, it really doesn't make a difference which piece I use, right? If I exceed the combat rating that I need, it's not going to make any difference, at least for the combat rating. For attributes, this has got lower vitality, and it trades willpower for intellect. So that is actually negative, right? Not only is it less overall attributes, but I've already just explained why intellect is a more favorable stat for the majority of the time over something like willpower. However, I still think the Shepherd's is a better piece, and this has nothing to do with the set bonus. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the magic affixes, this other thing that often gets neglected under the attribute line, where in this piece, it says damage done by your summons increased by 10%. Well, that seems really strong since I'm playing a summon necro build. So let's compare that to what I get for this piece. Slow resistance increased by 4%. Do I care about that in PvE? Not really at all, I'll tell you the truth. In fact, it may as well just not even compare it when comparing pieces in that regard. Movement speed increased by 4%. That could be valuable, especially if I'm not at the movement cap. But in general, I would say that 10% increased damage from my summons is far better than the 4% movement speed, especially in PvE combat. Now, I could argue this situation in PvP because I'm a huge supporter of having the maximum movement speed possible for PvP content, but in a strict PvE situation, which is what we're discussing, the movement speed isn't really all that crucial. In fact, if we were at the CR for a raid or anything like that, again, and we're just standing still in this raid, or it's a dungeon like, say, Namari, where our traveling is very limited and we're just standing at the final bosses for more time than going through the dungeon, the movement speed is pretty negligible, which makes this Shepherd's piece overall a much better piece. And then we still have the set bonuses to factor in. And I'm not going to talk about set bonuses in this video, especially in this regard, because it would just go on forever. But taking these pieces, removing what they actually do as a set and how many pieces you would have equipped, I would use the Shepherd's piece almost 100% of the time, unless I did not exceed the combat rating for something like a challenge rift, something like a raid, or I just break into the new difficulty, say Inferno, and I need to meet that combat rating in order to remove those negative bonuses that we get to our damage done, or increase the damage that we take from enemies until we kind of pass that threshold. I would use the higher combat rating. So in general, what you're looking for now is going to be multiple sets. And if you haven't been doing this, this is going to sound new or foreign, but you're going to want multiple, not necessarily set pieces like individual sets, but multiple pieces for each slot. And you're going to have different sets in your stash or your inventory, wherever it may be. You're going to have pieces of gear that you use for challenge rifts, pieces of gear that you use for dungeons, pieces of gear that you use to farm, because the RNG on all this has just increased dramatically by adding this new discrepancy between combat rating and the total of the attributes. So you're gonna need multiple pieces, and you're gonna want pieces of gear with these magic affixes that benefit what you're doing. So again, if I'm doing something stationary, damage done by my summons is enormous. If I'm doing something stationary, movement speed increase or even slow resistance doesn't do me anything at all. In fact, I could just be standing still while nuking a boss in something like Namari, as I said. So make sure that you're kind of evaluating everything. There's going to be a lot of gear saving because you're going to have a lot of pieces that may work. And then when you move other pieces around, a piece that you weren't using may slide in and now fit that puzzle. So the best suggestion I have is just to save as much as possible. One other thing that I want to mention as we close out here has to do with class changing. Now, class changing has just become more of a hiccup than ever. And the reason for this is because when you class change, you will not be able to use any of the gear that you have other than what is equipped with your character when you make that change. So you'll eventually have 8 slots if you don't have them yet, like myself, as well as the 6 on the left. So you'll be able to take 14 pieces of gear and transfer those over when you class change, which means if you have multiple versions of gear that you were using for loadouts, like a dungeon build, a challenge rift build, and so forth, you have to pick one and you have to transfer with those pieces, and the rest of it will no longer kind of be usable until you transfer back. And then if you do hold on to those, you're incredibly limited with stash space. So your stash space, your inventory space, are more important than ever. And you need to hold on to more pieces of gear if you want to maximize the benefit of your character. If you just want to play casual, and if you just want to have one size fits all, you'll most likely be in a situation where you're just prioritizing combat rating still, and that's fine as well. It's whatever you decide and whatever you enjoy. So I hope this answers up the many whispers that I've had so far, and then I'm sure to get as the day continues or the week goes on. And this is far from the only video I will have talking about the update. As always, thank you for taking time to watch, and have a great day.